Hello everyone and welcome to the complete guide of buying a property in Marbella. I'm Artur Loginov, CEO of Drumelia Real Estate, and to give you a bit of background, I've been in sales in Drumelia for around 15 years, and over the years I've sold properties worth 20, 30 and even 40 million euros. I started small. My very first deal was an 180,000 euro apartment. And in that time, I've seen every possible mistake a buyer can make. So I wanted to create this video to share the full process with you with transparency because I think it can help a lot of people. And I'll take you step by step through everything that you need to know so you can make the right decisions and enjoy the experience of buying in Marbella. What we're gonna cover: how to prepare before you even start searching. Then we're gonna move to what to know about Marbella's different areas and the viewing process, how to understand value and decide between ready or off-plan homes, the full process of making an offer and signing contracts. Then we'll move on to legal, technical and urbanistic checkups that you cannot skip. Then what happens after the notary and how the payment process works, so you get a clear understanding on that. The essential things to take care of after you become the owner, and advanced considerations like building, reforming or buying a plot. Then the most common mistakes buyers make and how to avoid them. And finally, I'll share a simple buyer checklist that you can use as your roadmap. By the end, my intention is that you'll have a clear picture of the entire process from the first moment you think of buying to holding the keys in your hand. So, are we ready? Let's start with phase one, preparation before you start looking. And before that, let's talk about why Marbella. Well, Marbella is not just another Mediterranean city. Marbella is a brand. You say Marbella in London, Dubai, New York, people know what it means. Lifestyle, exclusivity, sunshine. But it's also based on fundamentals. We've got 320 days of sun, unique microclimate, international schools, healthcare, safety, and an international community that makes you feel at home. So first of all, ask yourself, why Marbella for you? Define your goals. And here's a simple way to think about it, or start thinking about it. For primary homes, focus of course on school services, communities, and then for holiday homes, think more about lifestyle, easy maintenance, and whether you'll need help running it when you're away. And in both cases, I recommend always think about resale potential. I've often seen clients resell their property within a couple years, when at first that was never an option, not because they made a mistake, but because life changes, they start spending more time here and need something bigger, or less time also happens and they need something smaller. So these are the most common reasons that resale does happen in Marbella. Then of course set your budget, but first something very important. Every price that you see online, on portals, websites, agency brochures, all of that, that's all net prices. Taxes and costs always come on top and are paid by you, the buyer. For example, for a resale home, it's 7% transfer tax. For a new build though, it's 10% VAT plus 1.2% stamp duty. On top of that, in both cases, you've got lawyer, that's about 1%, and then smaller costs like notary, bank transfer, valuations, technical reports. All of that comes together to another 0.5% approximately. So in total, always plan around 12 to 13% extra in case you're buying brand new eventually, because you never know. But even though if you end up buying a resale, you'll save 4.2%. Right? Makes sense? Good. By the way, we have a purchase tax and mortgage calculator on our website, www.drumelia.com. You just need to introduce the purchase price and it calculates the rest, just in case you want to check that out. And I'm going to throw in an interesting tip for you. If you buy a second-hand property as an investment with the idea to resell it within 5 years, you can apply for reduced transfer tax of just 2% instead of 7%. If you end up keeping the home longer than 5 years, you'll just pay the difference later, plus a logical interest rate. But if you do resell within the 5 years, that reduced tax makes a huge difference. Next, let's move on to the basics to get in order. Ideally, start working on this before or during your viewing trip. Don't leave it for the last minute. I'll explain later as well why. But because if you're not ready when you want to make an offer, you risk losing the house. Or you might not get the same discount as someone who looks prepared. Some of those essentials to look out for. You'll need a NIE number that's required to buy and pretty easy to obtain. Then also potentially a Spanish bank account, even though it's not obligatory, but it makes everything much simpler. Yes, you can transfer from a foreign account and pay utilities abroad, but there are dozens of small reasons why having a Spanish bank account just saves a lot of headaches and time, so keep it in mind. Banks, lawyers, and agents will ask for your standard KYC documents, and banks especially, out of those three, will want detailed information on your funds. Speaking about mortgages now, residents can borrow up to 80%, but we are mainly speaking about non-residents. In a luxury bracket, that's usually around 50% of the purchase price, sometimes a little bit more, but count on 50 just to be on the safe side. And remember, the percentage is calculated on the lower of the purchase price or the bank's valuation. Meaning, if the home costs, let's say 100 euros and the valuation is 90 euros, you'll get 50% of 90, which is 45, not 50. So that's important sometimes for cash flows and so on. Even though most of the cases the valuation tend to come at the same price as the purchase or many times even higher. Also, at the moment of recording this video, interest rates are around 3 to 3.3%, slightly more with bigger international banks and slightly less with smaller local banks. Next, choosing an agent. If you're searching online, I recommend contact a couple of agencies on the same day. Then compare how fast they reply, how professional their communication is, and what feeling they give you. That already tells you a lot. In Marbella, all agents have access to the same properties. That's something that some clients don't know. So the difference is not who has the listing. The difference is in how they work with you. The difference is in their availability, their reaction speed, their negotiation skills. Of course, you don't know that at first, but for example, their willingness to commit time and energy, and whether they truly listen to you, to what you want, or they just send in generic brochures. All that gives you a good feeling. Now, one important note. In Spain, the agent's responsibility is not clearly defined. Some agents just show houses and don't control the negotiation, the legal checks, the urbanistic issues, and many other things. And other agents took full responsibility of the process. For example, in my case, I always will go the extra mile for my clients. I used to do pretty much everything that comes to mind. I would organize inspections. I was always present at valuation. I would help the clients to open the bank accounts. I would help the clients to find lawyers, check the title deeds, even page by page, just to see if there's any mistakes there. I supported with reforms and furnishings. So pretty much a 360-degree agent, which in the end is what we are building here in Drumelia. So when choosing an agent, think carefully, because the right one will make your experience smooth and the wrong one will leave you to deal the problems alone. Other key people during this process will be your lawyer. And if the deal has complicated tax implications, then possibly a tax advisor, even though it's not usual, and sometimes it's the same person as the lawyer. And those are the professionals that you will deal with directly. Notaries, surveyors, bankers, you'll see them, but the relationship is going to be minimal. Your main team is your agent, your lawyer, and sometimes your tax advisor. And now we are ready to move on to the phase 2, which is going to be about searching and viewing properties. But before you start viewings, it's good to have a sense of Marbella areas. Now keep in mind, what I'm about to share comes from our own experience at Drumelia. We mainly operate in high-end properties market. Last year, for example, we closed 62 transactions with an average price of 3.8 million euros and comfortably selling in the price bracket of 10 to 20 million. What I want to say with this is that this reflects what we see, and what I'm going to comment on in terms of Marbella areas reflects what we see with our type of clients. Of course, with possibly other budgets, the map of areas and priorities might look different. So, how we see it. The Marbella Center itself is mostly buildings, shops, restaurants and offices. It's nice to visit, great restaurants, but for high-end properties, there's not much to see there. So most searches begin to the west of Marbella Center. That's the Golden Mile, stretching towards Port Banús. To the north, you also have the north part of the Golden Mile, whereas communities like Sierra Blanca and Cascada Cambajan can be found at the foothills of La Concha. These are all very convenient central locations. They're close to everything, but prices are high and sometimes you compromise on privacy and tranquility. Once you get to know these areas, from there, most of the times the searches spread further west to Nueva Andalucía. It's a big residential area with 5 golf courses, many villas and apartments, and a huge variety of options. And next to it, you also have San Pedro, beachside mall, which gives you the beachfront properties. So together, this is one of the busiest areas of the market with thousands of homes from new builds to resales. Then, if you want more privacy, bigger plots, views, you'll probably move afterwards northwest towards La Quinta, El Madroñal, Zagaleta, Marbella Club Golf Resorts. These are all mountain communities. They're quieter, they're more private, they've got more land, but you compromise to a certain extent on convenience and driving time. In any case, it's good to look at all of these areas to compare and get a feeling for yourself. And if after that you still haven't found what you want, you can expand either west towards Estepona or east of Marbella. The east is very different. It has the best sandy beaches in Marbella. It's kinda, I would say, maybe more authentic with a traditional old style feeling, simpler shops and restaurants, more of a local atmosphere. In summer though, the beaches get very busy because they are the best here. Something to consider. Meanwhile, the more central areas like Golden Mile, Port Banús, Nueva Andalucía have seen huge growth. So they are full of lifestyle, brands, restaurants and services that make life very convenient. So each area has its own personality and there you go. It's up to you to decide what suits you best. Now let's talk about the viewing process. Once you've chosen your areas, you've chosen an agent who should organize the trip. The agent should pick you up, prepare the schedule, and drive you around. In one day, it's normal to see around 5 to 6 properties. Any more than that, and they all start to kind of blur together, so I don't recommend, even though sometimes when you're very tight schedule, it's okay, it's a question of your own organization, and also agent can help. If you're well prepared, 3 or 4 days of viewings are usually enough to understand our market. Our market is not that big. So 1 week is more than enough to explore the main areas and the available properties. And very important, of course, when I mean a week for available properties, there are many available properties, but once you narrow down your search criteria, you define your budget, you've understood the areas, which area you prefer, which not, what is more important, privacy, distance, schools, which schools. Once all that is clear, then the amount of available properties is not that big. And very important, for the properties that you like the most, it's always good to plan a second viewing, so have time for that. And even better to see them at a different time of day. For example, in the evening, it gives you slightly different atmosphere. The home just feels different. And I always recommend that if possible for the owners not to be there, even for the agent kind of maybe leave you alone for a bit so you can really feel the property with your family and see how it feels. Second, and evening visits, as I said, give you total new perspective. Eventually you, confirm if it really feels right. Another good tip, rent a car and drive around the communities by yourself after you visit the properties. That way you get a real sense of the area, the atmosphere, and whether you could picture yourself living there. Now, how do you evaluate what you see? For apartments and plots, price per square meter is a fairly reliable indicator. There will always be variations, but it works as a starting point. For villas though, price per square meter is the least it's not such a reliable number because two villas of the same size can have a totally different values depending on location, also the views, the architecture and design. For example, the quality of materials as well matters, the orientation matters, the light, how much light or how much privacy you have on the plot and in the property. Of course, the same also applies when choosing a plot of land or an apartment. The orientation, the views, the privacy, the access, all of this can completely or to a certain extent change the value. So the best way to build your judgment is to see enough properties to create your own frame of reference. Now let's talk about off-plan versus ready homes. Here the big question is for many buyers, do you want to move into your home immediately? I mean, start there. Or are you prepared to wait a year or two? Once we clarify this, which sometimes also opinions change as you get to know the market, what you will find with off-plan is that prices usually start lower and they often increase during construction. We've actually seen increases of 20 to 45% from pre-construction to delivery. I'll give you like a real example just right now. In Nueva Andalucía, there's a gated community right now of 15 villas priced around 5 million euro each. Since the very start, the developer already increased prices by 10% before starting building. And they're expected to rise another 30% by delivery. That's how fast values can move in a strong project. For apartments, off-plan can be very attractive if you're not in a rush. It usually gives you a more choice because the resale apartment market is quite limited. But always be careful with sizes when you're looking at off-plan new apartments because often they look bigger on the plan than they might feel in reality. So just double check and make sure you have a clear understanding. Now, with off-plan, you have to be prepared. There always will be delays. Sometimes 6 months, sometimes even more. If you accept that from the day one, it just won't come as a surprise and then it's fine. Now, speaking about off-plan villas, some villas are built by small developers or one-time investors. Building here is relatively, I would say, complicated. So for villas, unless it's a big developer with a proven track record, I often prefer buying what I can already see. But it's a question of looking more into the developer. In any case, by law in Spain, any off-plan project, doesn't matter if it's a villa, apartment, big developer, small developer, by law, any payments that you make, they must give you a bank guarantee for your money, meaning that the developer cannot use your money to build the project. He receives your money because he wants you committed into the project and it's not refundable if you just change your mind. But this money is deposited in a special bank account that the developer cannot touch. Then probably he gets a mortgage from the bank against that deposit, but that doesn't matter for you. Most important is that this money is deposited in a bank account the developer cannot touch. It's yours, and if the developer doesn't provide you, which was what he's supposed to build for you according to contract, if the completion date is too past the date that he was told or any other big infringements are made in the contract, then you can execute the bank guarantee and get your money back, or if the developer goes bankrupt, for example. So doing it like this, and that's by law in Spain, you as a client run no risk when making payments for future projects that are in the process. Just to keep in mind as well. So it's more transparent in this sense. Another key point, premium locations rarely have new developments because the best plots are already taken since long time ago. So if your priority is a good location on Golden Mile or a prime golf front villa, you most likely need to buy resale. You can move in quickly though, and you can always reform or renovate to your taste. For apartments, reforms are usually simple, unless you're going to do something huge. And for villas, renovations can become a bit of a bigger story, but it's still an option if the location is right. So in the end, it comes down to this. Do you want to move in now or can you wait? Are you prepared for at least a 6 to 12 months delay if you buy a plan, plus the time frame you're given? Do you trust the developer? Do you know enough about him? Have you seen other projects from him? Do you value a premium location because those are mostly resale? And are you ready to trade time and risk for potential upside? I think kind of starting there, you'll get a good feeling as well towards where you want to lean. So now we move on to phase number 3, which is making an offer, negotiating, and due diligence. There's going to be a total of 8 phases, and then 9, the last one is a conclusion. Just give you a... So, making an offer, negotiating, and due diligence. Let's say you found the property you like. The next step is making an offer, logically. An offer can sometimes be negotiated and accepted within just a few days. Other times, I've seen that it can take a week or even months of back and forth. Usually, I recommend to my clients that it's better not to negotiate face-to-face with the owner because emotions can get in the way, and it's almost always smoother and more effective to let your agent handle it. Your offer should be clear on the price and the taxes that you're going to pay as a buyer, what's included, furniture, fixtures, some extras, the payment schedule, and the expected completion timeline. The faster and cleaner that your offer is, the more attractive it looks to the seller. And here's something very important. Sometimes the seller doesn't pick the highest offer. They pick the most serious one. I've seen it many times. Last time was a couple weeks ago actually, on a 2 million apartment. The difference between the first offer and the second was 5% of the price. That's quite relevant. And the owner chose the second one. You see, the client offered less, but they had their NIE ready, their lawyers lined up, their funds prepared, and a clear timeline. The seller felt that deal was safer. The other client might offer more money, but if they look unprepared, uncertain, or slower, the seller sometimes won't take the risk. So all the preparation that you did back in phase 1 really pays off now. Let's say that the offer has been agreed and we move on to reservation contracts. If the seller accepts, the first step is a reservation agreement. Usually about 1% of the purchase price would be paid here, and this takes the property off the market. That money is normally non-refundable, but it's subject to legal and technical due diligence, meaning if the checks uncover a serious issue, you can get it back. Otherwise, if you change your mind, the seller keeps it. By the way, some agencies draft the reservation agreements that they keep the reservation money that you back out. Personally, I'm not really a fan of that. Just FYI. The reason the seller should keep it is because they have taken the home off the market for you and potentially lost opportunity. But let me be clear here with something. A reservation is not the strongest guarantee. If another buyer comes with a much higher offer, the seller can simply return your reservation to you or double it and accept the other deal. And unfortunately, sometimes some sellers are tempted to behave like that. That's why you want to move fast, straight to the next step, due diligence checks and signing the private contract. You could technically do the due diligence after the private contract, making it also subject to results, but it's cleaner and safer to do them before. So we have 3 checks to do. Legal due diligence. Your lawyer checks that the property is legally owned by the seller, that the property is free of debts, free of charges and other encumbrances, that it has not been sold, that it can be sold without any issues. And this includes checking the title deed, the land registry, community debts, and preparing the contracts. If furniture is included in the deal, make sure that it's listed as an inventory to be attached to contracts. This part is usually quite straightforward, and it can be done in just a few days or longer depending on the lawyer's availability. Then we have the urbanistic due diligence. This is about making sure that the property is legal from a planning perspective. The key document is the first occupation license, often called the LPO. This I'm going to have to explain a bit more in detail though. For apartments and townhouses, the main question is simple. Was the community legally built and does it have the license? Now, Marbella has a history here. Thousands of units built in the 2000s never received the license. Why? Developers slightly exceeded the permitted building volumes, so technically those communities are not 100% legal. But in practice, people live in them, they get resold, banks give mortgages. So it's not about your apartment being illegal, it's about the community not having that final certificate, and it kind of be normalized by all parties, including the town hall. So subject to your lawyer's opinion, not much risk in the majority of the cases. Some rare cases though of communities, the absence of LPO is not because the developer exceeded slightly the building volume, but because they built the development on a land that was designed, for example, for a park. Here, banks will not give you a mortgage, and your lawyer and myself will not recommend you to buy. But that's rare. For villas, things get a little bit more nuanced. So I'm gonna have to slightly get into technical details here. When a villa is finished, the developer and architect certified that it matches the approved building license based on the project plans. On the basis of that certification, the LPO is issued automatically. Later, the town hall may inspect, or it may never inspect at all. And that usually happens within the first year. And here's the reality. Almost every villa in Marbella has a basement with rooms that officially are storage, but in practice they're bedrooms, gyms, cinemas. This is extremely common. And 99.9% of the time, it never creates a problem. Still, of course, your lawyer should check it and inform you about it. But where the town hall is strict is with the extensions above ground. Like when a terrace is enclosed and turned into part of the living room or bedroom. This can happen during construction, or it can also happen years later by second-hand owners. If the change is small, it's usually not much of an issue. Worst case, you will have to remove it, and that doesn't really affect the value of your house. But if the change is big, for example, a terrace that was fully converted into a large bedroom with bathrooms, that's different. If discovered within the first 6 years, you may be required to demolish it back to the original state. And in that case, the house might not be worth what you paid anymore. If it's discovered after 6 years, then the property would be classified as fuera de ordenación, that's outside of planning, called in Spanish, outside of planning. And it means you don't need to demolish it anymore, you can still live in it, you can resell it, but you won't be able to get new licenses for major reforms in the future. And of course, in the eyes, whenever you want to resell it, in the eyes of the new buyer, most of the deals still go through, but it creates a little bit of an uncertainty at the beginning, so not ideal to be in that situation at all. So the safest way to avoid this is always to compare the current house that you're buying with the original approved plans by the town hall. If they match, you can feel confident. If not, you can make an informed decision or even use it as a negotiation tool. On top of that, usually lawyers will request our certificate of no infraction from the town hall. It simply confirms that there are no open issues with the property. It's not really needed, but it's like to triple check. But the catch is that this document can take months, so it often only arrives around the time of the notary signing, not the private purchase contract signing. So you should include a clause in the private contract that you can get out of the contract if this certificate comes with something wrong. Even though when the lawyer has done all the previous due diligence, I've never seen for the certificate to come with something wrong. Usually you will identify it anyhow during the process, but it's good to have that clause just in case. Now that we've covered legal and urbanistic due diligence, which is kind of many times as one, but I wanted to split it into two parts, we're going to move on to the last due diligence, which is number 3, the technical due diligence. This is the physical inspection of the property. Sometimes, can you believe I've seen clients not doing it at all? You don't have to whatsoever, but it's good. You're spending an important amount of money. It just will give you more security and a clearer view of what you're buying. Hopefully there will be no surprises at all, and it's like triple checking. What the inspector does, he checks the structure, he checks the installation, the equipment, the overall condition of the property. For new builds, if you're buying, everything should be perfect. And if it isn't, the developer has to fix it, as he's selling you a brand new home. For resales, you need to accept that some things will be older. That's normal. For example, if the air condition is completely broken, you can negotiate with the seller to repair it or replace it. But the FAC is old but still working, that's just part of buying a house that is not new, and it's not something the seller has to fix. The seller will be responsible for any hidden problems that may arise after the sale that were hidden on purpose, but for the rest, when you become the new owner, it's your responsibility. That's why good technical due diligence is recommended to give you a clear view. Also, one thing to keep in mind, technical reports often look scary, 20 pages, dozens of zoomed in photos of tiny cracks, but remember how the property felt when you visited, the good impression that you had in person. Most of these issues are actually very small. And the real value of the report is also that it lets you get a cost estimate from a constructor if you want to bring the house again to looking immaculate. And this way you know in advance if you're looking at 10 or 20,000 euros. And of course, if it's something bigger, then of course you want to stop to consider if you're making the right decision. So now we're going to move on to the private purchase contract. Once the checks have done, this is the next step. Here you normally pay 10% of the purchase price, and if you own 9% plus 1%, or 10% plus 1, actually there's no strict rule here, so maybe you can just insist on paying 9%, why pay 10? And this is what I call would be the real commitment from both sides. If the seller pulls out of this contract, they must return double the 10%. So that's a huge amount of money. If you pull out though, you lose your deposit, the full 10%. In most cases, 10% is paid after the legal and urbanistic and technical due diligence, as mentioned before, because that's the cleanest and safest way, no surprises. But sometimes you need to move faster, and in that case, you can make the 10% subject to those checks as well if the vendor agrees. From this point, the deal is basically secured. And here's the usual timeline. Just to review again, reservation signed within 48 hours after the offer is accepted. Sometimes parties can decide to skip this step actually and move on directly to the private purchase contract. The private purchase contract 2 to 4 weeks later, once all the checks are done, and the completion at the notary usually 1 to 2 months after the PPC. So overall, from offer to notary, you're looking at 3 months. Of course, extensions are possible, but usually sellers will ask for an extra non-refundable payment if you want more time. Now, let's move on to the next phase. And before we do that, as this is a very long video, I'm gonna refresh a little bit. I had this challenge that I wanted to make this video on one take. So let's see how I'm going. Next phase, phase number 4. Notary, completion, and payment process. So, once the private contract is signed and the 10% is paid, the final step is the completion of the notary. This is where the title deed is signed and where the keys and possession is handed over. How does the notary work? In Spain, the notary is a public official. Their job is to oversee the transaction, check the documents, and make sure everything is signed correctly. But the notary doesn't represent the buyer and the notary doesn't represent the seller. They represent the law. At the signing, 3 people must be there: the seller, the buyer, and the notary. Lawyers are usually present too, and also agents, but technically they're not required to. And in case you can't attend, you can of course give your lawyer or anybody else you wish a power of attorney to be present on your name. This is very common actually for foreign buyers, so your lawyer can sign everything on your behalf. Completion works in a very straightforward way. The buyer signs the purchase deed, then the seller signs, then the notary signs. At that exact moment, the ownership and the money changes hands. The buyer gets the keys and the seller gets the money, depending 90% of the price. And the idea is that it all happens simultaneously. How the money is paid? Well, there are 2 main ways. One is the preferred one, the banker's drafts. That's the most common and the most secure and the most recommended. That's how it's done in Spain. But for that, you need to transfer your money to your Spanish bank account in advance. Then your Spanish bank will issue the banker's draft in the seller's name. The moment the drafts are issued, the money already leaves your account and is blocked for the seller, so no one else can cash the check but the seller. So when you hand the banker's check at the notary to the seller, the payment is done and 100% guaranteed to the seller. Sometimes you may need several banker's drafts, one for the seller, one for the bank if a mortgage has to be cancelled, one or more for the agent's fees that are deducted from the purchase price, because it's always the seller who pays the real estate agent's fees. And also the seller pays a local called tax called plusvalía municipal. The second option is to pay with bank transfers during the signing. This is valid, but it's not as clean and straightforward. Transfers can take hours, sometimes, whilst banker's drafts give everyone immediate certainty. There's also the option of transferring funds to the notary's escrow account, but in practice, most notaries and lawyers in Marbella prefer to avoid this. Respect mortgages. If you're financing with a mortgage, the bank is also present at the notary. At the same moment you buy the property, you sign a second deed, that would be the mortgage deed, and this gives the bank its security. So in one single session, what happens? You are becoming the owner, and the seller receives the money, and the bank registers and receives the guarantee of the asset that you just bought. And it all happens in one step with full legal security to all parties. Additional costs at completion to keep in mind. On top of the property price and taxes, you also pay some completion costs. Some smaller costs, but important to know: notary fees, land registry fees, bank transfers, valuations, technical reports, that kind of stuff. Speaking now about utilities and services. Once you become now the owner, after the title deed went through, the utilities like water, electricity, internet need to be transferred into your name. If you have a Spanish bank account, then you can use that to set up direct debits. That way bills are paid automatically and everything runs smoothly. Taxes after completion. After signing the property transfer tax, or the VAT after signing the notary title deed, must be paid. Remember, transfer tax was 7% and VAT was 10% plus 1.2% stamp duty. So this tax that is paid by the buyer must be paid within 30 days from the date of the notary. And usually it will be your lawyer who handles this, but it's critical to know that late payments mean penalties, just in case. Also, if the property is in a gated community, you'd of course logically take over the community fees from the day of completion. This can range from modest amounts in smaller buildings to a couple €1,000 even per month in a luxury community with 24-hour securities, pools and other facilities. It's also smart to consider arranging the home insurance after the completion, just in case. And speaking about, once again, the possession and the keys at the moment of the notary, as mentioned, the seller gives you the keys. From that second, the home is yours and you have the possession of it. Small note, sometimes buyers want to get possession prior to the notary. Maybe they want to try to delay the payments to 6 months or more and already live in the house at the moment of signing the private contract. This is extremely difficult to agree with the vendor, and the only way to convince them is to significantly increase the non-refundable payment of 10% to 20, 30 or even 50%. And still, many owners will not agree because of simply how the law works in Spain in regards to the possession and in regards to the refundable payments. So it's just like a side note. Another important note, usually as mentioned from the reservation to notary, it takes 3 months, but it can be faster or slower if agreed by both parties. Why it's usually this long though? Well, maybe the vendor needs to move out. Also, usually the buyer can be quick with the 10% but needs more time to prepare the 90%. But it's also important to know, for general information, that we have sometimes done notary deals in 24 hours from the moment the offer was agreed. So it's perfectly possible to do much faster if that's what you want, or if the vendor, and of course if the vendor agrees, and if you have a team prepared to work day and night basically. Phase number 5. Now we move on to the after sale essentials. Once you've signed at the notary and received the keys, the process doesn't stop there. Owning property in Marbella comes with some ongoing responsibilities and also some important things to plan for. Registration, for example, the title deed is automatically sent from the notary to the land registry, but updating the registry can take about a month. It's just an administrative step, but it's important because that's where the official records hold that you are the owner. Your lawyer usually handles everything and later will receive the copy of the updated registry in your name. There you also need to notify the council so that the future EB property tax and garbage collection bills are issued to you, not the previous owner. You have the annual taxes. Every property in Spain has annual tax. The two most common are, as mentioned, the EB, the property tax, that's paid once a year to the local town hall, and the garbage tax, a smaller annual fee for rubbish collection. If you don't live in Spain full-time, you'll also pay non-resident income tax, even if you don't rent the property. The tax office calculates a small imputed income. Your lawyer or tax advisor can file this each year, but I did use the word small for a reason. These three amounts depend on the property, but compared to many other countries, I consider them relatively low. Now, speaking about residency. Most of our clients actually prefer not to become Spanish tax residents. The simplest way to make sure of this is by not spending more than 183 days per year in Spain. If you stay 183 days or more, then you can be automatically considered, a tax resident. And if you're a tax resident, then you also must declare your worldwide assets using the special 720 Modelo form if they exceed the threshold established. If you're not resident, you don't have these obligations. So this is one of the main reasons many clients keep their status as non-resident. It keeps their tax obligations in Spain much simpler. The wealth tax has been cancelled, and currently only the solidarity tax on large fortunes is the one that you want to pay attention to. Out of all the taxes, this is the expensive one, even though it's avoided, I believe, in 99% of the cases. Because it's based on the purchase price and only applies to purchases above 3.7 million per person. So the first 3.7 million per person are exempt from this tax. I'll give you a couple examples. Example number one, if a couple buys a 7 million euro property split 50-50 each, so each owns 3.5 million, so there's no solidarity tax. It would only apply for the amounts above 7.4 million because there are two owners. Example number two, if a couple buys a 14 million euro property with a 50% mortgage, the tax doesn't apply on the mortgage amounts because this is not wealth, it's debt. Therefore, again, no solidarity tax applies because 7 million is mortgage and each person has paid only 3.5 million under the 3.7 threshold. Of course, the more amount of owners, every 3.7 million per owner is exempt. So debts like mortgages can reduce the taxable base as long as they are properly registered and directly linked to the property, very important. And there are other legal ways to mitigate or even eliminate the impact of the solidarity tax with good tax planning. Now, briefly on also inheritance and gift tax. Andalusia is actually one of the most favorable regions in Spain. I don't know if you knew that. Each close family member, meaning spouses, children or parents, has a 1 million euro allowance. And on top of that, there's a 99% bonification on what remains, meaning only 1% tax on amounts inherited or gifted above 1 million euros. This means that in most family transfers, the inheritance or gift tax is almost zero. This makes Marbella quite unique for luxury destinations, where I believe majority of the cases is not like that. Now let's talk a little bit about renting your property. If you plan to rent short term, that's a rental of less than 2 months long, you need a rental license from the Junta de Andalucía. The process is fairly straightforward, but it must be done correctly, and rental income is of course taxable in Spain. Also, it could be that the community in which you are buying prohibits short-term rentals. There's not too many of them, but there are some, so it's better to check this in advance. For long-term rentals, the process is simpler with no limitations, but you still need a solid contract because Spanish law protects the tenant strongly. Now I'd like to touch base on selling in the future. Sometimes, some days, sometimes it will happen. And even if you're buying a dream home, resale potential always matters. I've seen many clients sell after a few years because sometimes they want something bigger, smaller, or just different, or something changed. And when you sell, there are two main taxes to consider. You have the capital gains tax, that's for non-residents 19%. It applies to your profit, meaning to your net profit, meaning the difference between your net sale result minus costs like agency fees, lawyer fees, total acquisition cost, which includes the purchase price, taxes, notary fees, and any documented improvements or even furniture. Also note, when a non-resident sells, the buyer withholds 3% of the sales price. I know I'm speaking maybe about vendors and this is for buyers, but it just gives you an idea because when you will be looking at properties, you might hear things, it might get confusing. So I just want to lay it out easy for you. So the buyer withholds, this is not a cost for you, 3% from the sale price and pays it into the tax office as an advance. It's a retention. You didn't just file to receive it back, and if you have no pending debt, you will get it back. Another tax paid by the vendor is the plusvalia tax. That's the local tax based on the increase of the land's cadastral value and based on the years that you owned it. Usually, it's not a significant number. You must have owned the property for more than 10 years for it to be a relatively important number to consider at the moment of sale. So this brings us to phase number 6, and after such a long phase, I'm gonna make a quick refill. Okay, stay with me. Advanced considerations. Now that we've covered the basics, let's take it one step further. There are a few advanced considerations that may not apply to everyone, but they can make a big difference depending on your situation. Buying as an individual or through a company. For example, one of the first questions high-end buyers often ask, should I buy it on my name or should I buy it through a company? Both are perfectly possible in Spain, are relatively easy and don't really affect anything. Actually, when the buyer doesn't have this clear, I recommend that in the reservation and the private purchase contract, we establish the possibility that the buyer decides at the notary if he wants to buy on his private name or on any company where he is the final beneficiary. That's a simple clause that therefore gives you up to 3 months or possibly even more to make this decision clearly. Generally, buying on a personal name is simpler, and that's what most people do. There's no special reason, to be honest, to buy in a company unless you have an international structure that makes sense to include the home in that purchase. And that's pretty much it. Building, again, it made sense for the inheritance, for example, possibly, but as mentioned, the inheritance is almost none if it's between family members. Another typical question, build, reform, or buy as is. Many clients say and ask, should you build your dream villa, reform an older one, or buy something that was already finished? Buying a finished home is, of course, the fastest. What you see is what you get. You can move in right away, even if it's not 100% perfect. And as you get to know the property better, your decisions of how to want to reform it might change. So I always recommend the clients to live in the house before taking the final decisions, because the flow of the property, the way you see it versus how you feel it when you actually live there changes many times. It happened to me so many times. So reforming an existing villa can be smart if the location is prime, but it comes with challenges. We've got licenses that are required, costs can escalate, and timelines often stretch. And I'll be honest, unless you're local or you have someone completely that you can trustworthy with proven experience, I don't usually recommend big reforms for people coming from abroad who mainly want to enjoy their time in Marbella. The process can become a lot of headaches sometimes, so for that reason. Buying a plot and building from scratch gives you in theory exactly what you want, but it's the riskiest and slowest option logically. Permits can take again time, costs almost always run higher than expected. I mean, I haven't ever seen a house being built for what it was anticipated. And what you thought would take 2 years can easily come at 3 or more. So the question comes down to your patience, your risk tolerance, your time investment, and whether you truly want to be involved in the process or whether you prefer to move in and enjoy your new home right away. By the way, I did build around 20 villas as a project manager and owned a construction company. So as a reference, have gone through these processes a little bit. Now let's talk about plots. When it comes to buying plots, there are extra things to know. First, the potential hidden costs. Preparing a plot can be very expensive, especially if it's not a slope. If it's on a slope, you may need retaining walls, geotechnical studies, and soil reinforcement before you even start construction. And this cost can easily reach hundreds of thousands of euros. Then we've got the purchase taxes, and it's kind of tricky here and different from the purchase taxes for all the other properties. All the other, if it's apartments, townhouses, villas, it's all as explained before. But for plots, it's different, and it depends on who owns the land. If the land is owned by a private individual, you pay the 7% transfer tax, same like with the homes. But if it's owned by a company, then you pay 21% VAT. Not the 10% like on a finished new build, but the full 21%. If you're buying for yourself, the plot, whichever tax applies, is simply a cost, and you can't choose which tax applies. But if you're buying the plot as an investment to build and sell, then 21% VAT can actually be better. Why? Because you can fully reclaim the 21% VAT at the moment of the sale of the built property. So it's only a cash flow issue for the 3 years of the project, whereas the 7% transfer tax is a pure cost you cannot recover as a developer. This is one of those advanced details that can make a big difference depending also on your strategy. And here the way you're going to buy the plot has to be done before you buy the plot. Sometimes I've seen clients not realize this, buying and losing the possibility of reclaiming the 21% VAT back after they sold the house, which is a huge amount of money. Another consideration, of course, lifestyle. Do you prefer a villa or an apartment? You'd be surprised how many times over the process of buying a home, clients' criteria might change from being fixed on a villa to actually buying an apartment, vice versa. And sometimes I've seen clients just beachfront apartments, nothing else, and they end up buying a plot on the mountain. So, lifestyle considerations. A villa, of course, gives you privacy, land, independence, but also it's more responsibility, it's more maintenance. An apartment or penthouse offers services, conveniences, more security, but of course less space and less privacy. That's the basic logic where to start off. In terms of location, beachfront means direct access to the sea, but smaller plots and busier surroundings, as mentioned, whilst mountain views, villas gives you privacy, bigger lands and spectacular views, but you compromise on distance and convenience. So, of course, there's no right or wrong here. It's about what works for you, and you will see as you get to know the Marbella, your decisions will become more clear as well. Another consideration is the change of the utility bills and the taxes under your name, just to double check to make sure that all the bills, water, electricity, internet, are correctly switched into your name. I've seen many cases where clients or the lawyers forgot to do this, and one day the electricity gets cut off because the bills were never changed, or years later unpaid EB taxes suddenly appear 5 years in a row. And these surprises can happen, come with extra charges, and they're easily to avoid if you take care of it from the day one or if you follow up with your lawyer after the deal. Phase 7. Let's talk about common mistakes that we can avoid. Even with good advice, there are some mistakes that I see buyers repeat over and over again. I want to touch base on this. And the truth is, most are completely avoidable. Let's start number 1. Not preparing in advance. We spoke about this. One of the biggest mistakes is not having your basics ready before making an offer. I've seen buyers lose homes simply because they didn't have their NIE, their funds in place, or their mortgage pre-approved. Imagine investing 3 months of your time visiting properties, finally finding the perfect one, and then losing it just because you weren't prepared. It happens actually more than you think. Mistake number 2, working with too many agents. Technically, you can work with as many agents as you want in Marbella. But if you spread yourself too thin, you'll end up confused with no one truly committed to helping you. In my experience, when you find an agent you trust, commit to them. You'll receive better service, better advice, and often a better chance at securing the right property. Mistake number 3, focusing only on the house and not the area. Some buyers fall in love with the villa but forget to check the area properly. Maybe the views are great, but the drive is too long. Or the villa is perfect but the community doesn't fit their lifestyle. The property and the area go hand in hand. So always take the time to drive around, explore the neighborhood, and picture your real day-to-day life there. Mistake number 4, rushing the negotiations. Sometimes buyers get too emotional and push too quick with negotiations, or sometimes they push too much for an extra one last small discount, and other times they try to do it face-to-face with the seller. The best negotiations, in my experience, are handled calmly through your agent and your lawyer, or just the agent. Depends what you prefer. And if you try to push the seller into a corner, you can actually lose the deal. We just had the case right now with a 12 million property. The buyer negotiated the price for 2 months and made the owner reduce way below what he was prepared and below the market price. And while then the buyer was getting ready with his preparations, which he also didn't do in advance, it was very easy for the vendor to find someone in a couple of weeks who would pay more. Mistake number 5, ignoring due diligence. Another classic mistake is skipping or rushing the legal and technical checks. Some buyers think, I love the house, let's just move forward. Others simply don't know what kind of revisions are necessary, and that's where they risk missing important issues. Ignoring due diligence can mean discovering problems later, things that could have been solved or even negotiated before. Mistake number 6, underestimating extra costs. Remember, every price you see online is net. On top, you have the taxes, notary, registry, lawyer, technical reports, but also keep in mind the smaller things, moving costs, furnishing, small reforms, changing some details in the house, that all of this can build up relatively quickly. I've seen clients spend their entire budget on a purchase and then feel overwhelmed with these extras appear, and that's not a great feeling when you're buying your dream house. The smart approach is to always add 12-13% for taxes and fees, plus some extra margin for the practical costs that may come afterwards. Mistake number 7, not thinking about resale. Even if you're buying your dream home, circumstances change. You may want something bigger, smaller, or just different. You might discover that you love another area of Marbella more. If you buy a home in a complicated location, it might be very difficult to resell later, even if you love it. The same goes for the investment you make after the purchase. Some people spend heavily on very tailor-made features. Maybe I'm exaggerating, a pink marble bathroom that they adore. But when the time comes to sell, buyers rarely value those customizations. I've had many clients say, but I invested 1 million into this house and nobody values it. That's why every improvement should be made with intelligence, always keeping the resale potential in mind. Or if you don't care about it, then just make it as you wish and enjoy. In the end, that is the most important. So, phase 8. Now we're going to talk about the practical buyer checklist. We've pretty much gone through all the details by now. So I'm going to give you a clear buyer checklist. Think of this as your own roadmap, step by step, from the moment you start thinking about buying until the day you own your home in Marbella. So let's review. Step 1, preparation. Define your goal, what type of home and how you're going to use it. Set your budget. Always add 12-13% for taxes and costs. Get your NA number. Open a Spanish bank account, even though optional, but useful. Line up your lawyer if possible, and if you need financing, start your mortgage process early, especially collecting your documents. Step number 2, choose your team. Contact a couple of agencies, compare how they work, and choose the one you trust most. Select an independent lawyer who only represents you, and if needed, bring a tax advisor. Step number 3, search and view. Explore Marbella's main areas and see which fit your lifestyle. If you know more than 5-6 properties per day, that's plenty. Shortlist your favorites and revisit them ideally at different times of the day. Drive around the neighborhood yourself to get the real feel of the community. Step number 4, understand the value. For apartment and plots, price per square meter is a good guide. For villas, focus more on location, views, privacy, orientation, and quality. Always keep the resale potential in mind. Step number 5, offer and negotiation. Make your offer clear and simple. Include price, payment schedule, timeline, and furniture if it's part of the deal. Be aware, sellers often prefer the most serious buyer, not always the highest offer. Sign a reservation contract, usually 1%, to take the property off the market. Step 6, due diligence. Let your lawyer and technical team do their work. Legal check, confirm ownership, debts, license and certificate. Urbanistic checks, verify planning, compliances and the first occupation license. Technical check, structure, equipment and installations. And always confirm in writing which items in the property are included. Step number 7, private purchase contracts. Sign the contract and pay the 10% deposit. It's non-refundable unless you've agreed otherwise. From this moment, the deal is almost fully secured. And step number 8, completion at the notary. Sign the title deed, hand over the money, receive the keys. It all happens at the same time. And if you're using a mortgage, the bank signs at the same moment. The whole process from reservation to notary usually takes 3 months. Can be actually much faster or slower if both parties agree. Next step, after sale essentials. Register the deed in the land registry. Organize your future property related taxes, EB, basura, non-resident tax if it applies. Set up utilities and insurance, and if you plan to rent short term, apply for a rental license. Now, phase 9, conclusion and final advice. So, that's the full journey of buying a home in Marbella. From setting your goals and budget to finding the right area, to making offers, completing due diligence, signing at the notary, and then handling all the after-sale essentials. Buying here is not complicated, but it does require being prepared and having the right people by your side. Of course, I always have seen the agent job and responsibility to guide you through every single step of this process. You can have time to enjoy it and don't need to think about all this stuff. This is the luxury experience when you have someone that can take all the stress away. My final advice is simple. Take the process step by step. Choose the right agent and lawyer. Don't rush, but when you find the right property, be ready to act fast. Marbella is a unique market. It's international, it's competitive, and it's constantly evolving. But it's one of the most attractive places in Europe to buy a home, especially if you plan to spend more than 2 months, like a semi-permanent place. So if you're considering buying in Marbella, I hope this guide has given you clarity, transparency, and confidence. And of course, if you'd like personal advice or if you want my team and me to guide you through the process, feel free to reach out. Marbella is a special place. And if you prepare it well, buying a home here can be one of the best decisions you ever make. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Artur from Drumelia. And now a little bit of water. If you stayed until here, let me know what you think about this video.